Hi, everyone. I'm Steve Elliott, the head of Jira Align here at Atlassian, and I'm joined by Tristan Boutros, the CTO of the American Society of Composers, Authors, and Publishers, ASCAP. And Tristan, really excited to chat with you today.
Thanks, Steve, for having me. It's a pleasure.
Great, great. Well, let's kick it off. Can you give us a little bit of a background on your role as CTO at ASCAP?
Yeah, so I've been with ASCAP now for about 3 years, and while I would say I do have the traditional roles and responsibilities of a classic CTO, I also oversee not just software engineering, but also project management, enterprise delivery, anything from telephony to our network and even the printers. So if it's something in our building that touches technology, it's under my purview.
Yeah, and the music industry has gone under such huge digital transformation over the last decade, really. Can you tell us a bit about how that shift in the industry as a whole has affected ASCAP and your members?
Yeah, for ASCAP, I think more so than a lot of other companies, and maybe not too different from a lot of media companies, we're a membership association. And so we're comprised of songwriters, composers, publishers, and we license our members' music to businesses and organizations that want to use it. And that's anything from radio, TV, cable network, streaming services, you name it. And so in particular for us, scaling and data processing, right, especially when digital is increasing exponentially right now, is really been kind of the focal point for us the last few years. And the thing, or the single variable, I think, that's forcing us to be more digital first or technology first in our operations. And so it's become incredibly easy for our members to produce and release music even on their own digital tools and services. And so for us to be able to keep track of those plays, where they're played, process that information, and then be able to pay royalties on it, we're processing literally trillions of performances in a given year for over 775,000 members. And so that data volume and growth and being able to scale with it at industry pace has really been the shift. I think that's been our primary focus for sure.
Yeah, and our industry is so full of all the different terms and different vernacular. But one I'm curious about, when you talk about enterprise agility, like how do you define that?
Yeah, for me, I actually teach a class on agile and agility at Columbia University as well. And, one of the opening lectures in it is the whole kind of traditional textbook, literal interpretation of agile about, those who perceive it as process and tools versus those who view it more as, a mindset and a way of operating or thinking. And for me, the way I try to articulate it to folks, and at least it's my personal opinion, is it's all about flow of work and connecting people to the work and making sure that there's a good cadence or flow of work. We talk, like you said, about kind of those industry buzzwords and trends about digital disruption and being able to pivot and needing that level of agility. And so one of the other ways of looking at it is how employees feel at an organization that's in a competitive or changing industry. And I find that they need to feel connected to the work, and executives need to be able to understand how projects and work on the ground is actually going as well. And the connection of that, right, at all levels within the organization, using different methodologies, frameworks, or tools is really, really key to make sure that you have a good outlook, right, or a good planning horizon of where you need to go, risks in your environment, that sort of thing, but that folks understand and can communicate changes in the environment in both directions to keep the enterprise kind of on its toes and able to pivot. So it's really that it is that mindset, but it's about flow of work and connection of work to industry and changing dynamics for sure that I think is critical.
Got it. Got it. Yeah, that was great. Yeah, and that's the same way that I tend to think about it. So it's connecting the work with the outcomes and trying to understand, the correlation between the two, and you mentioned the word pivot, right? Being able to pivot to better outcomes and be able to make decisions faster. Is that kind of the key ways that you will know you're successful with the transformation? I know it's a long range transformation, but is that really the key thing you're driving towards, or are there other big markers for what success looks like with your transformation?
there's two almost lenses that I look at our evolution, right, as an organization, particularly from a technology or digital evolution. There is that, right? How we're handling and scaling with data, the industry trends, and how what it is we're producing actually gives value to our membership, right? It's very, very important for us, especially as an organization who's constantly advocating for them. But there is sort of the internal performance markers as well about not just the value or the features or experiences that we're delivering for them, but how our teams are actually performing as well. And I find that they're very interconnected and related. So while we are trying to measure those outputs, how they affect organizational change and our, I guess, position as a differentiator within the industry, how teams are performing, what their outputs are, what their metrics are in terms of velocity or output. To me, and even morale, right? Are our teams happy? Do they feel connected to the work? We try to track as best as we can, really, at both of those levels and through both of those lenses.
That makes sense. Yeah, and that's a good transition into my next question, which is earlier you were mentioning, there's kind of the mind shift and the ideas around enterprise agility. There's also kind of the practices. Um, how do products and like the common team practices play a role at ASCAP? What are some of the key ones that have really worked well for you in terms of practices and tools?
Yeah, I think from a tooling or product perspective, just getting all of our folks into standardized or similar tools where we can collaborate on ideas or ideation, discovery, right through to actual delivery, between Jira and the other tools in our suite, right down to road mapping and future planning has been critical for us. That centralization of the information, I don't think anybody can pay more to have present in an environment, especially one that needs to go through some form of transformation or evolution. And for us, there's three main things I think that we've put in place that have really brought us great success. One was introducing those products and tool sets so we can do things like prioritize, view any dependencies across different teams. For sure, that has been priority number one. The other one would be road mapping, and just being able to have, again, that kind of common or central view of features and things being delivered across different teams visually to be able to track in a different way than, say, just going into a traditional backlog or looking at it, at a single team view. And then, you know, we've also introduced kind of quarterly social planning, and so our goal is to always have like a rolling 90-day horizon into the future. And so we get all of our business stakeholders involved every quarter, prioritizing work with us. We spend a good chunk, if not the whole day, across all of our different teams and divisions, really kind of thrashing, planning the quarter ahead, making sure that short-term, goals tie to our longer-term strategic vision, and then coming out of that day, we can broadly communicate all of that, update, things I was mentioning earlier, like roadmaps and everything. And I think if teams and organizations can keep it that simple, but use those tools and kind of standard methods to communicate across different teams, but again, also going back to that enterprise lens we were talking about, upwards and downwards, um, I think with those kind of simple things, it can work really effectively, and we've seen that for sure at ASCAP.
Great, great. Yeah, and another question I had for you, I was curious about, COVID's, I'm sure, affected your business in different ways. Can you talk a little bit about ways that you've had to pivot because of that change? I think it'd be really interesting in the context of agility.
Yeah, I think for us, the good news is a lot of our, and the theme here I see developing in our chat is really evolution or that transformation. The good news for us is it started just a little bit before COVID really set in. So we had already sort of put in a digital first or mobile first workforce mentality, work anywhere, any place, always on, always connected, to the best that we possibly could. And so there were a few things we rolled out probably in the March timeframe that a lot of other organizations were rolling out. But we already had a good chunk, fortunately, of the logistical things we needed in place tactically, like virtual desktops or laptops or video conferencing for all our employees, or suites of tooling, in particular Atlassian for our day-to-day project work and operational work. And so While it affected us, I would say it affected us really in two different ways. The ability to take that social dynamic of our work digitally, like having social planning every quarter where everybody can get into big rooms and there's post-its and planning, even though we're digitizing everything, is radically different than, say, working on a, Zoom or a WebEx call to do that. And so making sure that our internal processes evolved in a way that took the concept that we kind of had in place, but really internalized it or put it into practice fully, I think has been key. And then there's a lot out there in the industry just besides COVID that's taking place. And so our organization, on behalf of our membership, has also had to pivot um, and evolve as well. And so we have a bunch of programs that we've launched, like Music Unites Us, which is like a series of resources for mental health or financial help for our memberships, for our membership base, and to keep creativity flowing, right, has been important for us to push and advocate for. And then hosting different conferences online as well. So a lot of our conferences that we do, if you follow our schedule or calendar at all, we would put on even different shows or conferences all throughout the year, and we've had to shift that mobile as well. And so just kind of making sure that we can keep the experience and a lot of our principles and practices in place throughout this has been probably more important for us than the actual technical changes that we needed. And I think that's a credit to a lot of the products that we use today for our planning and operations.
Yeah. I think that's going to be really interesting to see the long-term impact of all of this because, um, same at Atlassian in terms of we've really strengthened our ability to work remotely. Just making sure that we can collaborate and stay connected when there's so much remote going on, I think will be one of the key challenges. But yeah, it sounds like you've adapted really well to that. And it sounds like you'd already been investing. Some companies that I've talked to, it's hitting them a little harder because they didn't have all of that infrastructure in place.
And don't get me wrong, we had some hurdles along the way, but I think that early tooling and process that we did put in play helped us to get over those humps pretty smoothly. And again, I think it's been more external focus now to our membership base, even more so than internally.
Got it. Got it. So another question I had for you, just a CTO of such a dynamic organization, I'm curious what metrics you key in on. We talked a little bit earlier about outcomes and outputs, but what are kind of some of the primary metrics that you focus in on kind of on a weekly basis that kind of help you figure out where to spend your time?
Yeah, I think for me, one of the visions that I've always had, and I don't think I've necessarily been able to put it into place, quite yet, but we're pushing very hard here, is almost like those operation centers with the TVs, and you can see like all activity going on at once. I mean, for a lot of companies different than ASCAP, especially those in transportation or logistics or SOX or security operations centers, they have a lot of that in place, whereas we're just really starting to grow that footprint. And so for me, I really try to focus on three main areas in any given week. The first one is really just infrastructure, the normal classic stuff about uptime, health of our servers, what's going on from a storage capacity, compute, application perspective. And it's just general health more than anything. The second one would be kind of security metrics. Again, where do we see risk, vulnerability? What is trending for us? How are we doing from a patching perspective or just general security perspective? But the third one is really about work and productivity. And I think this is one for me personally that I find almost more important. Don't get me wrong, security is always top of mind for everybody, but just how the teams are doing. And so we've set up multiple dashboards for each of our teams, whereby we track things like our burn down charts and normal kind of scrum metrics, how many tickets are created versus closed. And so we've got Jira dashboards in particular set up, as well as Jira Align kind of program dashboards where you can go almost at the click of a button and drill down into what's going on in that team, right down to almost the results from their last retrospective, where you can see live feedback from the team and something we call the morale meter, where they're voting on how they're feeling just generally about the work, anything, you name it. And so you can click in there and see, hey, this team doesn't look like they're finishing their commitments as well as they normally do. Like there's a dip in velocity. Why might that be? Was there something that happened in the last retrospective? Was there something that went wrong in our last release? And so you can see the trending of our sprints, our releases, things of that nature right in the dashboards. But you can also see kind of other metrics that may indicate trends or things that might be going on with that team, so we can really dig in and problem solve where we need to, or hopefully, or I like to think, a little bit faster than if those metrics or kind of gadgets and stuff didn't exist.
Right, right. Fantastic. Yeah. So thanks for that, Tristan. So any parting thoughts or lessons learned in terms of enterprise agility and just making the most of it, making the most of your transformation as we wrap up for today?
I think the lessons that I've learned so far are really just communication and transparency. You can never go too far with that. And I think, again, if we go to the age-old transformation stuff that the industry talked about, say 10 years ago, it was getting management buy-in and involvement, not just having team involvement. And I think that has changed for a lot of organizations today because they realize the criticality of having good planning, vision, connection with teams, and being able to pivot. But I think you can never communicate risk, plans, horizons, change in priorities, trade-offs that teams need to make, issues. And so if you've got the right tooling and products in place to be able to make the work super visible, you've got that aspect, but then just classic, and I guess today, even WebEx or Zoom calls, right? You can never get the facts and the metrics and the data and the information out there, early, often, and as much as possible is kind of the mantra. And I think it helps with the transformation, setting expectation, which then makes everybody's life just a bit easier.
Yep. Could not agree more. Well, thank you so much for taking the time today and doing this. I learned quite a bit, and thanks for being a customer. And to all of you out there, we appreciate your time.
Steve, my pleasure. Thank you so much. And we appreciate everything that the Atlassian team does as well. Thank you.
Thank you.